The fire crackled in the mountain darkness and cast dancing shadows across her face as she hunched over a tattered book, her lips moving silently while tracing each letter with a dirt-stained finger. Quinton Irving had been tracking an elk for 2 days through the Colorado wilderness near La Veta when he stumbled upon the small cabin, and what he saw through the window stopped him dead in his tracks. A young woman sat alone, struggling with words that clearly eluded her understanding, her brow furrowed in concentration so fierce it made something in his chest tighten. He had lived in these mountains for 6 years now, ever since the war ended in 1870, and he could no longer stomach the sight of cities and their memories. His broad shoulders barely fit through most doorways, his arms thick with muscle from swinging axes and hauling timber, and his dark hair hung past his collar in waves he rarely bothered to trim. Most folks in La Veta knew him only as the mountain man who brought down game and furs to trade twice a month, speaking little and leaving quickly. But something about this woman's determination, her solitary battle with letters and words, stirred something he thought the war had killed. Quinton stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under his weight. The woman's head snapped up, her green eyes wide with alarm. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with auburn hair tied back in a simple braid and a face that showed both beauty and hardship. Her dress was worn but clean, patched in several places with careful stitches. "Did not mean to frighten you," Quinton said, his voice rough from days without speaking. "Saw your light, wanted to make sure everything was all right." "I am fine," she said quickly, closing the book and standing. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5 feet 8 inches, but still had to look up at his 6'4" frame. "Thank you for your concern, but you can be on your way." He noticed her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the book to her chest. "You are out here alone." "That is none of your business, sir. I can take care of myself." Quinton nodded slowly, recognizing the defensive pride in her voice. He had heard it in his own for years. "I am sure you can. Name is Quinton Irving. I live about 3 miles north, higher up the mountain. Hunt and trap mostly. If you need anything, you can find me. Thank you. Good night." She moved to close the door, but he saw her eyes flick to the book she held. In that brief moment, he recognized hunger, not for food, but for knowledge, for understanding. It was the same look he had seen in young soldiers' eyes when they wanted to write home but could not form the words. "That book you were reading," he said before she could shut the door completely. "My mother taught me letters before she passed. I could help if you wanted." Her expression shifted, suspicion warring with hope. "Why would you do that? Been alone on this mountain a long time. Might be nice to have a purpose beyond surviving." The words came out before he could stop them, more honest than he intended. She studied his face for a long moment. He bore her scrutiny without flinching, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she opened the door a fraction wider. "Aurora Ellis," she said. "I found this cabin abandoned 6 months ago. The book was left behind. I have been trying to make sense of it, but nobody ever taught me proper. My father thought education was wasted on daughters." "Where is your father now?" "Dead. Cholera took him last spring, along with my mother and younger brother. I had nowhere else to go, no other family. So I came here and decided to make my own way." Her chin lifted defiantly, daring him to judge her. Instead, Quinton felt respect bloom in his chest. Survival took many forms, and this woman had chosen one of the hardest paths possible. That takes courage. Aurora blinked, clearly surprised by his response. Most people would say it takes foolishness. Most people have never had to truly survive. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how large and imposing he must seem in her doorway. "I will leave you be. But if you want help with that reading, I will come back tomorrow evening. No obligations, no expectations, just two people learning together. You said you already know how to read. I do. But I have forgotten what it feels like to share knowledge with another person. Maybe we both have something to learn. She considered this, her green eyes searching his face again. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she gave a small nod. Tomorrow evening, then. But if you try anything improper, I have a shotgun and I know how to use it. I would expect nothing less. Quinton touched the brim of his hat and stepped back into the darkness. He made his way back to his own cabin that night with thoughts tumbling through his mind like river stones. He had not had a real conversation with anyone in months, and certainly not with a woman. The war had taken that ease from him, that ability to exist comfortably around others. But something about Aurora Ellis made him want to try again. The next evening, Quinton washed more thoroughly than usual, combed his hair back, and even trimmed his beard before making the 3-mile trek down the mountain. He brought a haunch of venison as an offering, along with 2 books he had saved from his previous life. One was a simple primer, the kind used to teach children. The other was a collection of poems his mother had loved. Aurora opened the door at his knock, and he noticed she had also taken care with her appearance. Her hair was freshly braided, and she wore a different dress, still worn but perhaps her best. The cabin behind her was tidy, with wildflowers in a jar on the rough table. I brought some meat, Quinton said, holding out the venison. Figured you might need it. I can provide for myself, she said, but her eyes lingered on the meat with unmistakable hunger. But I suppose it would be rude to refuse a gift. Thank you. She took the venison and set it aside, then gestured to the table where her tattered book lay open. Quinton saw it was a Bible, the pages worn soft with age and handling. He set down his 2 books beside it. We will start with this, he said, opening the primer. Build up the foundation first, then move to harder texts. They sat together at the table as the fire burned low and the mountain darkness pressed against the windows. Quinton started with the alphabet, writing each letter on a piece of bark with charcoal. Aurora knew most of them already from her efforts, but her knowledge had gaps. She learned quickly, though, her mind sharp and eager. Why did you really come back? She asked suddenly, looking up from the letters. Quinton met her gaze. Honestly, because I have not felt useful in a long time. The war took a lot from me, made me forget what it was like to do something good. Helping you remember how to be human, I suppose. You fought in the war. For years. Colorado 2nd Regiment saw more death than any person should. He did not elaborate and she did not push. Some wounds needed time before they could be exposed. My father fought too, Aurora said quietly. He came back different, angry all the time. That is part of why he would not teach me to read. Said there was no point in anything anymore, that the world was just going to end in blood anyway. The world has plenty of blood in it, Quinton agreed, but there is also this. 2 people sitting by firelight trying to make something good out of survival, that counts for something. She smiled then, small and tentative but genuine. Yes, I suppose it does. They worked through the evening until Aurora's eyes grew heavy. Quinton stood to leave, gathering his hat. Same time tomorrow. Yes, and Quinton, thank you, truly. He nodded and stepped out into the night, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Every evening, as the sun began to set behind the peaks, Quinton would make his way down to Aurora's cabin. They established a rhythm, a comfortable pattern that gave shape to their days. She would have coffee ready when he arrived, and he would bring meat or vegetables he had traded for in La Veta. Sometimes he brought fresh fish from the mountain streams. Aurora proved to be a dedicated student, practicing letters and words during the day while Quinton worked his trap lines. Her progress was remarkable. Within the first month, she could read simple sentences. By the second month, she was working through the Bible with increasing fluency. The poems his mother had loved became their evening routine. He would read a line, then she would repeat it, sounding out the difficult words until they flowed naturally. But it was more than just reading that grew between them. They began to share stories, carefully at first, then with increasing openness. Aurora told him about growing up in a sod house in Kansas, about how her mother had sung while churning butter, about how her younger brother Tommy had loved catching frogs by the creek. She spoke of the crushing grief when cholera swept through, taking her family within days of each other. "I was immune somehow," she said one evening, her voice distant. "I nursed all three of them, watched them fade, buried them with my own hands, and then I just walked away. Could not stay in that house with all those ghosts." Quinton understood. He told her about growing up in Denver when it was still rough and wild, about his parents who had run a general store, about how he had enlisted with dreams of glory and come home to find both his parents dead from influenza. How he could not stand the city anymore, the noise and crowds a constant assault after years of war. "I needed silence," he said. "Needed space where the only thing I had to worry about was my next meal and keeping warm. The mountain gave me that. Are you still running?" Aurora asked, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "Maybe. But lately, I have been thinking maybe I have run far enough. Maybe it is time to start building something instead of just surviving." The air between them shifted with those words, charging with possibilities neither dared name yet. Winter came early to the Colorado mountains that year. By October, snow was already falling in thick curtains, and Quinton found himself worrying about Aurora alone in her cabin. He had helped her stock wood for the winter, cutting and splitting enough to last months, but these mountains were unforgiving. A bad storm could trap someone for weeks. One evening in late November, he arrived to find her shivering despite the fire, her face pale. She had been trying to repair a crack in the cabin wall where cold air whistled through, but the work was beyond her strength and experience. "Let me," Quinton said, immediately assessing the problem. The chinking between the logs had deteriorated badly, probably why the cabin had been abandoned in the first place. It was a wonder she had survived this long. "I can do it myself," Aurora protested, but her teeth chattered. "I know you can," he said gently, "but you do not have to. Let me help." He spent the next 3 days working on her cabin, arriving each morning with supplies and leaving only when darkness made work impossible. He replaced the bad chinking, repaired the roof where it leaked, and reinforced the door against the wind. Aurora worked alongside him, learning, her hands growing calloused and strong. On the 4th evening, when the work was complete and the cabin finally felt secure against winter's assault, they sat together by the fire with a new ease between them. Aurora had made stew from the venison he brought, adding wild onions and herbs she had gathered and dried during the summer. "I do not know how to thank you," she said as they ate. "You do not need to. This is what people do. They help each other." "Not in my experience. Most people only help when they want something in return." Quinton set down his bowl and looked at her directly. "I will not lie and say I do not want anything, but what I want is not something that can be taken. It has to be given freely." Aurora's breath caught. "What do you want?" "To keep coming here, to keep sitting with you by this fire, to see your face when you finally read a whole page without stumbling, to hear you laugh, which you have started doing more often. That is what I want." "Those are easy things to give," she said softly. "Are they?" "Because it feels like I am asking for everything." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were small and delicate compared to his, but strong. "You are not asking, Quinton. I am offering. I look forward to your footsteps on my porch every evening. I wake up thinking about what we will read together. When you are gone, the cabin feels empty in a way it did not before I knew you." His heart hammered in his chest. "Aurora, I am not a refined man. I have rough ways and a past full of dark things. I live in the wilderness because I do not fit anywhere else. But I care for you. Have cared for you since that first night when I saw you fighting so hard to understand those letters. You deserve to know that." "I care for you too," she said, her eyes bright. "You have given me more than reading lessons. You have given me hope that life can be more than just surviving day to day, that maybe I can build something meaningful here." Quinton moved closer, his free hand reaching up to cup her face. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. His lips met hers gently, tentatively, as if she might shatter. But Aurora leaned into the kiss, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and isolation melting between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Stay tonight," Aurora whispered. "The snow is getting worse. It would not be safe to travel back." Quinton knew the snow was not that bad yet, knew he could make it home easily. But he also knew what she was really asking, and everything in him wanted to say yes. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I do not want you to leave. I do not want to be alone anymore. You will never be alone again," he promised. "Not if I have anything to say about it." That night, they lay together in her small bed, learning each other with the same patience and care they had brought to the reading lessons. Quinton was gentle with her, reverent, treating her like something precious. Aurora met his tenderness with her own quiet passion, and in the darkness of the cabin with snow falling softly outside, they became something more than two lonely people seeking comfort. They became a promise of what could be built between two souls who had lost everything and found each other. The winter that followed was harsh, with storms that lasted days and temperatures that froze exposed skin in minutes. But Quinton and Aurora faced it together, spending most nights in her cabin as it became truly theirs. They continued the reading lessons, but now they read to each other while lying in bed, Aurora's head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. She improved rapidly, her hunger for knowledge insatiable. By Christmas, she could read the poems without help, her voice carrying the words into the quiet cabin. Quinton loved listening to her read, loved watching her face light up when she understood a difficult passage or discovered a beautiful phrase. "Listen to this," she said one evening, reading from the poetry book. "I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils." "That is beautiful," Quinton said, running his fingers through her unbraided hair. "It is. But I like this part better. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." She set the book aside and looked up at him. "That is what being with you feels like my heart is dancing." He kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling this woman had awakened in him. "We should get married," he said suddenly. Aurora pushed herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "Are you asking because you think you should, or because you want to?" "Because I want to. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Because I want to build a real home with you, have children with you if you want them, grow old watching you read by the fire." "Marry me, Aurora, make this official." Tears filled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." When the worst of winter passed and the trails became passable again in late February, they made their way down to La Veta. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered where the mountain met the plains, but it had a church and a preacher. Reverend Thomas Carlyle was a kind man in his 50s who asked few questions when Quinton and Aurora appeared at his door requesting marriage. "You both sure about this?" he asked, looking between them. "Never been more sure of anything," Quinton said, his hand firmly clasping Aurora's. "I can see that. Well then, let us make it official before God and the law." They were married in the small church with only Reverend Carlyle and his wife Martha as witnesses. Aurora wore a new dress they had purchased at the general store, simple blue calico that made her eyes bright. Quinton had gotten a proper haircut and shave, though his hair still touched his collar and his beard was neatly trimmed rather than removed completely. When Reverend Carlyle pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton kissed Aurora with such tender reverence that Martha Carlyle dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You two come for Sunday dinner next time you are in town," Martha insisted. "We do not get many young couples up here, and I would love to hear your story properly." They promised they would and made their way back up the mountain as the sun began to set. Everything looked different now, Quinton thought. The same mountains, the same trees, but transformed by joy. He was not alone anymore. He had a wife, a partner, someone to build a life with. Spring came slowly to the high country, revealing itself in patches of exposed earth, and the first brave wildflowers pushing through the remaining snow. Quinton and Aurora spent those weeks planning their future. His cabin was larger and more secure than hers, built with care over several years. They decided to make it their main home, though they would keep her cabin as well for storage and as an emergency shelter. Moving Aurora's few possessions took only one trip. She had so little, which made Quinton determined to give her more. Not material things necessarily, but experiences, joy, a sense of security and belonging. They planted a garden together in the clearing near his cabin, Aurora delighting in the act of putting seeds in the earth and imagining the vegetables that would come. "I always wanted a garden," she said, patting soil around tomato seedlings they had bought in La Veta. "But we moved too often when I was young, and then after my family died, I was just trying to survive day to day." "Now we build," Quinton said, working beside her. "No more just surviving." As summer arrived in full, the mountains transformed into green paradise. Quinton taught Aurora how to fish in the cold streams, how to identify edible plants and avoid poisonous ones, how to read weather signs in the clouds and animal behavior. She proved an excellent student in this too, her mind quick and her hands capable once she understood the principles. But it was the evenings Quinton treasured most. After dinner, they would sit together on the porch he had built, watching the sun paint the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Aurora would read aloud from their growing collection of books. In addition to the Bible and poetry, they now had a collection of Shakespeare plays, a novel by Charles Dickens, and a natural history book that Aurora particularly loved. "Listen to this," she said one evening, reading from the natural history book. "The golden eagle is among the largest and most formidable predators in North America, with a wingspan that can exceed 7 feet. These magnificent birds mate for life, building enormous nests that they return to year after year." "Like us," Quinton said, pulling her closer against his side. "Building our nest, returning to it together. You are surprisingly romantic for a mountain man," Aurora teased. "Only with you. You bring it out in me." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Aurora took Quinton's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I think I am with child." He went very still, hardly daring to breathe. "Are you certain as I can be? I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings. Quinton, we are going to have a baby." Joy exploded through him, so intense it almost hurt. "A baby. We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Happy, Aurora, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to have a family. He kissed her then, trying to pour all his love and promise into that kiss. They would protect this child, give it everything they had not had, raise it in this mountain home surrounded by beauty and love. The darkness of their pasts did not have to define the future they were building. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Aurora bloomed, her body rounding with their child, her face glowing with health and happiness. Quinton was endlessly solicitous, trying to do all the heavy work and keep her from overexerting herself. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Aurora protested when he tried to keep her from carrying water from the stream. "I know, but let me take care of you anyway. It makes me feel useful." She laughed and kissed his cheek. "You are always useful, you stubborn man. But I will let you carry the water if it makes you happy." They made several trips to Lavetta that fall, preparing for the birth. Martha Carlyle had experience as a midwife and promised to come stay with them when Aurora's time drew near. They stocked the cabin with supplies, gathered herbs and medicine, and prepared as best they could for the coming winter and the new life that would arrive with it. In early December, with snow already deep on the ground, Aurora went into labor. Quinton had ridden down to fetch Martha Carlyle 2 weeks earlier, and the older woman had been staying with them, helping with preparations. When the contractions started, Martha took charge with calm efficiency. "Quinton, I need you to boil water and bring me clean towels," she instructed. "Then you can stay with Aurora, hold her hand, help her through this." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Quinton stayed by Aurora's side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until he thought the bones might break, wiping the sweat from her face, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her in this situation. Martha guided them through it all with patient expertise. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, a baby's cry split the air. Quinton felt his eyes fill with tears as Martha cleaned and wrapped the infant before placing it in Aurora's arms. "A boy," Martha announced, beaming. "A healthy, strong boy." Aurora looked down at their son, her face transformed by wonder and love. The baby had a shock of dark hair like Quinton's and Aurora's green eyes. "He is perfect," she whispered. "What will you name him?" Martha asked. Quinton and Aurora looked at each other, having discussed this for months. "Thomas," Aurora said, "after my brother, Thomas Quinton Irving." "That is a fine, strong name," Martha approved. "Welcome to the world, Thomas Irving." Quinton carefully touched his son's tiny hand, watching in amazement as the infant's fingers curled around one of his own. This small person was theirs, born of their love, and would carry their legacy forward. The weight of responsibility was staggering, but so was the joy. Martha stayed for 2 more weeks, teaching Aurora how to nurse the baby, helping them adjust to the demands of parenthood. When she finally left, Quinton paid her generously and extracted a promise that she would return in spring to check on them. "You two will do just fine," Martha assured them as Quinton helped her onto the horse that would carry her back to town. "I can see the love in this home. That child is blessed to have you as parents." The first months with Thomas were exhausting and wonderful. The baby woke every few hours needing to be fed, and the cabin that had seemed spacious now felt full of new life and purpose. Aurora adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning to read, though she admitted the learning curve was steeper. "Nobody tells you how hard this is," she said one night, rocking a fussy Thomas while Quinton prepared their dinner. "I love him more than I thought possible, but I am so tired I could cry." "Give him here," Quinton said, taking the baby. "You eat and rest. I can walk with him." He paced the cabin with Thomas against his broad chest, humming tunelessly until the baby finally settled and slept. Looking down at his son, Quinton felt a fierce protectiveness that eclipsed anything he had ever known. This child would never know hunger or abandonment or the loneliness that had haunted both his parents. This child would grow up surrounded by love. As Thomas grew, so did their routines. Aurora returned to her reading, now adding teaching Thomas his letters to her goals. Even though he was still an infant, she would hold up letter blocks Quinton had carved and name them, determined that their son would have the education she had been denied. "You are a wonderful mother," Quinton told her one evening, watching her with Thomas. "I am trying to be. I keep thinking about my own mother, how patient she was even when we had nothing. I want to give Thomas that kind of love and also the opportunities she could not give me. He already has both. Look at him. He is healthy and happy and loved. What more could a child need?" Spring arrived again, the second spring of their marriage. Thomas was now 5 months old, growing rapidly and beginning to show his personality. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, especially at his father's face. Quinton would spend hours playing with him, making faces and sounds that sent the baby into peals of laughter. They planted a larger garden that year, anticipating greater needs. Quinton had also started building furniture, discovering a talent for woodworking he had not known he possessed. He made a proper cradle for Thomas, a rocking chair for Aurora to nurse in, and a larger table for their growing family. "We need more books," Aurora announced one day. "I have read everything we have at least 3 times. Thomas needs to grow up surrounded by books." "Then we will get more books," Quinton agreed. "We will make a trip to La Veta next week, see what the general store has. Maybe even order some from Denver." The trip to La Veta was festive. Martha Carlyle was delighted to see Thomas, exclaiming over how much he had grown. They had dinner with the Carlyles, and Aurora spent the evening talking with Martha about motherhood and life in the mountains while Quinton and Reverend Carlyle discussed hunting and weather patterns. At the general store, Aurora discovered a treasure, a box of books that had arrived from the East, intended for a schoolteacher who had never shown up. The store owner, a pragmatic man named Harold Fletcher, was happy to sell them at a discount just to free up space. "Mostly primers and basic texts," he said. "But there are a few novels in there too, and a book of American poetry." Aurora went through them with shining eyes, already planning which ones she would read first and which she would save for when Thomas was older. Quinton watched her with a full heart, remembering the woman he had first seen struggling with a single book by firelight. Look how far they had come. That summer was one of the happiest of Quinton's life. He had work that satisfied him, a family that gave him purpose, and a wife who filled his days with joy. The mountains that had once been a place to hide became a home to cherish. He taught Thomas to recognize animal calls, holding him up to see deer in the meadow or eagles soaring overhead. Aurora continued reading voraciously, but now she also started writing. At first just simple things, lists and notes. But gradually, she began writing longer passages, reflections on their life and observations about the world around them. "I want Thomas to know our story someday," she explained when Quinton asked about the pages she filled each evening. "I want him to understand where he came from, how much he is loved. Maybe I will even write down the story of how his father taught his mother to read by firelight and how that changed everything." "It is a good story," Quinton agreed, reading over her shoulder. "You write well, Aurora. You have a gift for putting feelings into words." "I learned from the best books I could find, and from the best teacher." She kissed him softly. "You gave me this gift, Quinton. Reading opened up the whole world to me. I can travel to England with Dickens, understand the natural world through science, feel the emotions of Shakespeare's characters." All of that came from you sitting beside me and patiently teaching me each letter. You did the hard work. I just gave you the tools. No, you gave me much more than that. You gave me hope and love and a reason to keep learning. You gave me this beautiful life." Autumn came again with its brilliant colors and crisp air. Thomas was now a year old, taking his first wobbly steps and saying simple words. His first clear word was "Papa," which made Quinton's heart swell with pride. Aurora pretended to be offended that "Mama" came second, but she was clearly delighted with their son's progress. They celebrated Thomas's first birthday with a small party, just the three of them in their mountain home. Aurora had baked a cake with precious sugar and eggs they had traded for in town. Thomas made a mess of his slice, getting more on his face than in his mouth, and both parents laughed until tears ran down their faces. "This is what happiness looks like," Aurora said that evening after Thomas had been put to bed. She and Quinton sat on the porch in the twilight, wrapped in blankets against the cool air. "I never thought I would have this. After my family died, I thought I would just survive day to day until I died too. But then you found me, or I found you, and everything changed." "I was thinking the same thing earlier," Quinton admitted. "Before you, I was just existing. Going through the motions of living but not really being alive. You and Thomas, you make me want to be better, do more, build something that lasts. We are building it right now. Every day we are together, every meal we share, every story we read, every moment with Thomas. That is what lasts, Quinton. Love lasts." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Aurora Irving, more than I have words to express." "Then it is good you married someone who can help you find the words," she teased. "We will read poetry together and you will learn." As Thomas grew into a toddler and then a young boy, the pattern of their lives deepened and became richer. Quinton taught him to fish and track, to read the signs of weather and wildlife. Aurora taught him letters and numbers, reading to him every night just as Quinton had once read to her. The cabin that had once been Quinton's solitary refuge became a home filled with laughter and learning. They had 2 more children in the following years. A daughter they named Margaret after Quinton's mother, born when Thomas was 3, and another son named James, born 2 years after that. The cabin grew with additions Quinton built, adding rooms for the children and expanding the living space. The garden expanded too, and they acquired chickens and a milk cow, building a more complete homestead. Life was not always easy. The mountains could be harsh, and there were hard winters when food ran low and sickness threatened. But they faced everything together, their love for each other and their children carrying them through difficulties. Aurora became known in La Veta as the educated woman on the mountain, and other families occasionally sent their children to her for lessons. She taught them reading and arithmetic at her kitchen table, finding deep satisfaction in passing on the knowledge Quinton had given her. Thomas grew into a tall, strong boy with his father's build and his mother's quick mind. He could read advanced texts by age 8 and showed his father's talent for working with his hands. Margaret was more delicate but fierce, with Aurora's determination and a love of poetry that delighted her mother. James was still young but showed signs of being the family's adventurer, always wandering off to explore and having to be retrieved from increasingly creative hiding spots. One evening when Thomas was 10, Margaret 7, and James 5, the family sat together after dinner as they always did. But tonight was special. Aurora had written something she wanted to share, a project she had been working on for years in secret moments. "I wrote down our story," she told Quinton and the children. "From the beginning, when your father found me trying to teach myself to read, through to today. I want you children to understand where you came from, and I want this story preserved so your children and grandchildren will know it too." "Can you read it to us, Mama?" Margaret asked, cuddling close. "Yes, please," Thomas added, and James nodded enthusiastically even though he was too young to fully understand. So Aurora read, her voice carrying through the cabin that love had built. She read about the lonely young woman struggling with letters by firelight, about the mountain man who sat beside her and patiently taught her. She read about love growing in the Colorado wilderness, about a marriage made in faith and hope, about children born into a home filled with books and learning and deep devotion. Quinton listened with tears in his eyes, struck by how Aurora had captured not just the events but the emotions of their journey. When she finished, the children were quiet, processing the story of their parents' love. "That is a really good story, Mama," Thomas said finally. "I am glad Papa found you that night." "So am I, sweetheart, so am I." That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Quinton and Aurora sat together by the fire much as they had that first night years ago. But now Aurora read effortlessly, her voice confident and strong. They had come so far from those tentative beginnings, built so much together. "Do you ever regret it?" Aurora asked suddenly. "Stopping that night, taking on the burden of teaching me." "Burden." Quinton pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "Aurora, you were never a burden, you were a gift. You gave me purpose when I had none, love when I thought I would never feel it again, a family I never dreamed I could have. The only regret I have is that I did not find you sooner." "We found each other at exactly the right time," Aurora said, kissing him softly. "Any earlier and we would not have been ready. We each needed to walk our hard path so we could appreciate this happiness." "You are probably right. You usually are." She laughed and settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Tell me what you are thinking about." "About how that first night, I saw you fighting so hard to understand those letters. You had lost everything, but you had not given up. That fierce determination is what first drew me to you, even before I knew how beautiful you were, or how kind, or how perfectly you would fit in my arms. I was determined to learn because I knew education was freedom. I never imagined it would also lead to love. The best things usually come when we are not looking for them. I was not looking for love when I found you. I was looking for solitude and peace, but what I found was so much better." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Outside, the mountain night was alive with sounds, the call of an owl, the whisper of wind through pine trees, the distant howl of a wolf. These sounds had once been Quinton's only companions, but now they were simply the backdrop to a life rich with human connection. "I want to teach more children," Aurora said eventually. "Not just the few who come occasionally. I want to start a real school, maybe in La Veta. There are so many children growing up without education, and I know what a difference it makes." "Then we will do it," Quinton said immediately. "We can talk to Reverend Carlisle and the town council. La Veta needs a school and you would be an excellent teacher. What brought you to this idea?" "Writing our story made me realize how transformative education has been for me. Not just the practical aspects, though those are important. But reading opened up my world, let me experience things beyond this mountain, gave me the tools to teach our children. Every child deserves that chance." "You are an extraordinary woman, Aurora Irving. You know that. I am an ordinary woman who was given an extraordinary opportunity by a man who saw potential instead of limitations. Now I want to pass that on." The school became Aurora's passion project over the next year. With support from the Carlyles and other families in La Veta, a small schoolhouse was built near the church. Aurora taught 3 days a week, with Quinton bringing her down the mountain in the morning and collecting her in the evening. On the days she taught, Margaret came with her, eager to learn alongside the other children. Thomas sometimes came too, though he preferred helping his father with trap lines and hunting. The school thrived under Aurora's patient instruction. She had a gift for making learning engaging, for recognizing each child's unique abilities and challenges. Parents marveled at how their children suddenly wanted to read, brought books home with excitement, talked about stories and poems as if they were treasures. "You have given these families something precious," Martha Carlyle told Aurora one day. "Some of these children would never have learned to read without you. They would have grown up like their parents, limited by lack of education. You are changing the future of this whole community." "I am just passing on what was given to me," Aurora demurred. "No, you are doing much more than that. Quinton taught you to read, yes, but you are teaching these children to love learning, to see education as a path to broader horizons. That is your unique gift." The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. Thomas grew into a young man of 16, already taller than his father, and showing an interest in both his father's woodworking skills and his mother's love of learning. He talked about maybe becoming a teacher himself someday, or perhaps a lawyer, drawn to the idea of using education to help people. Margaret at 13 was quieter than her brother but equally determined. She had her mother's way with words and filled journals with poetry and observations. She wanted to be a writer, to capture the beauty of their mountain home and share it with the world through stories. James at 11 was still their wild child, happiest when exploring the wilderness with his father. But even he loved when the family gathered in the evenings to read together, and he could recite long passages of poetry from memory. Quinton was now 43, his dark hair threaded with silver, but he was still strong and vital. The mountains had been kind to him, and so had love. He looked back on his younger self, that angry, traumatized veteran who had fled to the wilderness and barely recognized himself. Aurora and their children had transformed him into someone who could laugh freely, love openly, and face the future with hope instead of dread. Aurora was 38, still beautiful with laugh lines around her eyes and a serenity that came from knowing herself and her purpose. The frightened young woman who had struggled to read by firelight had become a confident teacher, mother, and pillar of the Lavetta community. But she never forgot those early days, the patience Quinton had shown her, the gift of knowledge freely given. One evening in late summer, the whole family sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Thomas was reading aloud from a book of American poetry, his voice deep and confident. Margaret was sketching the view in her journal, trying to capture the play of light on the peaks. James was whittling a piece of wood under his father's supervision. Aurora sat in her rocking chair, knitting and listening, a peaceful smile on her face. "This is perfect," she said softly to Quinton, who stood behind her chair with his hands on her shoulders. "This moment, this life, it is everything I never knew I wanted." "I was just thinking the same thing," he replied, squeezing her shoulders gently. "Who would have thought that night I saw a woman struggling with a book by firelight would lead to this?" "Mama, tell us again about how you and Papa met," James requested, setting down his whittling. "You have heard that story 100 times, Thomas protested, but he was smiling. "I never get tired of it," Margaret said, closing her journal. "Please, Mama." Aurora looked up at Quinton, who nodded encouragingly. She would never tire of telling this story, of remembering how far they had come together. "It was a cold October evening in 1876, she began, her voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. "I was alone in a small cabin, trying to teach myself to read from an old Bible I had found. I had lost everything, you see. My family was dead and I had nowhere to go. But I had this stubborn belief that if I could just learn to read, I could make something of my life. She continued the story, with Quinton occasionally adding details she had missed. The children listened raptly, even though they knew every word. It was their family's founding myth, the story that explained where they came from and why education was so valued in their home. When Aurora reached the part where Quinton first sat beside her to teach, Margaret sighed romantically. That is the most beautiful part. Papa saw Mama struggling and decided to help instead of judging or walking away. I did not have much choice, Quinton said with a smile. Your mother's determination was magnetic. I could not have walked away if I wanted to. You could have, Aurora corrected. But you chose to stay. You chose to give your time and knowledge to a stranger for no reason except kindness. That choice changed both our lives. It was the best choice I ever made, Quinton said firmly. The story concluded as it always did, with their marriage and the building of their family. But tonight, Thomas had a question he had never asked before. Papa, you said you were running from something when you came to the mountains. Do you ever feel like you are still running? Or did finding Mama let you stop? Quinton considered the question carefully. His children knew he had fought in the war, knew he had seen difficult things, but they did not know the full extent of what he had experienced. Maybe it was time to share more of his story. I was running, he said slowly. From memories of war, from the grief of losing my parents, from a feeling that the world had gone dark and there was no place for me in it. I came to these mountains to be alone because I thought that was what I needed. But I was wrong. What I needed was purpose and connection and love. Your mother gave me all of that. So Mama saved you, James said matter-of-factly. Yes, she did. Just as I like to think I helped save her. We saved each other, really. That is what love does. It takes two broken people and makes them whole together. Aurora reached up to clasp Quinton's hand where it rested on her shoulder. We are blessed to have found each other. And now we are doubly blessed to have you three. Our family is proof that even after loss and hardship, beautiful things can be built. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, the family moved inside. They lit lamps and built up the fire, settling into their evening routines. Thomas helped his father with some woodworking plans, while Margaret practiced her writing, and James played with carved animals his father had made for him years ago. Aurora prepared tea and laid out the book they were currently reading together as a family, a novel about adventure and honor. This was their life, built on a foundation of two people coming together over lessons by firelight. The love that had begun with patience and shared learning had grown into something that sustained not just two people but a whole family. It would continue to grow, Aurora knew, branching out as their children grew up and started families of their own, passing down the values of education, kindness, and determination that had been forged in a mountain cabin years ago. Later that night, when the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Quinton and Aurora prepared for bed. The familiar rituals of their life together had a comfort that never grew old. Aurora brushed out her long hair while Quinton banked the fire, then they climbed into the bed they had shared for so many years. Thank you, Aurora said softly in the darkness. For what? For everything. For teaching me to read, for loving me, for giving me this life. I think about that young woman I was, so alone and afraid, and I want to tell her that everything will be all right, better than all right, that she will find love and purpose and joy beyond anything she can imagine. I wish I could tell my younger self the same thing, Quinton replied, pulling her close, that the darkness will not last forever, that healing will come in the form of a stubborn woman fighting with letters by firelight. We have been very lucky, Aurora murmured, already half asleep. Not lucky. Blessed. There is a difference. As Aurora's breathing deepened into sleep, Quinton lay awake a while longer, thinking about the path his life had taken. Every choice, every hardship, every moment of suffering had led him to that night when he looked through a cabin window and saw a woman who would change everything. He would not trade a single moment of his past, no matter how painful, because it had all been necessary to bring him to this exact point. To this woman sleeping in his arms, to the children dreaming in the next room, to this life he could not have imagined in his darkest days. The mountains stood silent and eternal outside, witnesses to countless stories of survival and struggle. But they also witnessed stories of love and hope, of human connection transcending hardship. Quinton and Aurora's story was one thread in a vast tapestry, but it was their thread, unique and precious. 5 more years passed, bringing the family to new milestones. Thomas, now 21, had indeed become a teacher, working alongside his mother at the school in La Veta. He also courted the daughter of a rancher, a smart young woman named Elizabeth who shared his passion for education. Their wedding was planned for the spring. Margaret, at 18, had begun publishing her poetry in newspapers as far away as Denver. Her work captured the beauty and hardness of mountain life, drawing readers who had never seen the Colorado peaks but could experience them through her words. She had also fallen in love with a young man named Samuel, an aspiring journalist who valued her intelligence and talent. James, at 16, was still deciding his path. He worked with his father on the trap lines and had become an expert woodsman, but he also showed an interest in medicine after helping treat an injured hunter. He talked about perhaps studying to become a doctor, bringing medical care to the remote communities of the mountains. Quinton and Aurora watched their children's lives unfold with pride and joy. They had given their children something neither of them had fully possessed growing up: opportunity. The chance to choose their own paths, armed with education and confidence. The school in La Veta had grown as well, now teaching nearly 30 children of various ages. Aurora had trained 2 other teachers to help her, ensuring that education would continue even beyond her direct involvement. The community had come to value learning, understanding that it was the key to their children's futures. On a crisp October evening in 1897, exactly 21 years after Quinton first found Aurora reading by firelight, they returned to her old cabin. It still stood, maintained as a storage building but otherwise unchanged. They had not been inside together in years. "I wanted to come back here tonight," Aurora explained as they stepped through the door, "to remember where we started." Quinton looked around the small space, memory flooding back. "You sat right there," he said, pointing to where the table had been. "So focused on that book, your lips moving as you tried to sound out the words. I thought you were the most determined person I had ever seen." "I was terrified when you knocked on the door," Aurora admitted. "I thought you might be dangerous, or that you would mock me for my ignorance. But instead, you offered to help. You changed my entire life with that offer." "You changed mine too. I was so lost, Aurora. I did not even realize how lost until you gave me a direction, a purpose." They stood together in the small cabin, holding hands, remembering the people they had been and marveling at who they had become. The journey from that night to this moment had been filled with love and learning, with hard work and dedication, with the building of family and community. "Should we read something?" Aurora suggested, pulling a book from the bag she had brought. "Like old times. I would like that." They sat on the floor where the table used to be, and Aurora opened the book. It was the same Bible she had been struggling with that first night, kept all these years as a treasure. But now she read from it with perfect fluency, her voice strong and sure. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. She closed the book and looked at Quinton. When I first found this verse, years ago, I did not understand it. I had lost everything and had no hope for a future, but it was true. There were plans I could not see, a future I could not imagine. And it all started here, Quinton said, looking around the cabin, with two people learning together. We should do something to mark this place, Aurora suggested, to preserve the memory of what happened here. What did you have in mind? A plaque maybe, or a sign. Something that says two people found love and purpose here through the simple act of learning together. So that long after we are gone, people will know that beautiful things can start in the smallest, humblest places. I will make something, Quinton promised. Carve it in wood that will last, telling our story for future generations. They spent another hour in the cabin, talking and remembering, before walking back to their home through the October darkness. The path between the two cabins had been worn smooth by years of travel, first by Quinton coming to teach, then by both of them moving Aurora's belongings, and finally by countless trips back and forth over the years. When they reached their home, lamplight glowing in the windows and smoke curling from the chimney, they paused to appreciate the sight. This was what they had built together, warmth and light and love. A place where learning was valued and children were raised with both strength and gentleness. A home in the truest sense of the word. Inside, their children waited with a surprise. They had decorated the house with autumn flowers and prepared a special dinner. "What is all this?" Aurora asked, delighted. "We know what day it is," Margaret explained. 21 years ago today, you and Papa met. It is your anniversary in a way. The anniversary of when our family began, Thomas added. We wanted to celebrate that. James brought out a package wrapped in paper. We made you something, all three of us together. Aurora unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound book, blank pages waiting to be filled. But on the first page, in beautiful script, was a title. The story of Quinton and Aurora, as told by their children. We each wrote down our favorite stories about you two, Margaret explained. Things you have told us over the years, memories we have of growing up in this home, what your love has meant to us. We thought you might want to add your own memories, make it a complete family history. Aurora's eyes filled with tears as she paged through the book, seeing her children's handwriting, reading their words of love and gratitude. Quinton stood behind her, reading over her shoulder, equally moved. "This is the most precious gift you could have given us," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." They spent the evening reading through the book together, laughing and crying over the memories their children had recorded. Thomas had written about learning to track with his father, and how Quinton always made him feel capable and strong. Margaret had captured moments of reading poetry with her mother, the way Aurora made words come alive. James had written about family evenings by the fire, how safe and loved he always felt in their mountain home. "You three are our greatest accomplishment," Aurora told her children. "More than the school, more than any of the things we have done individually. You are proof that love and dedication can overcome anything. And you too are proof that it is never too late to change your life," Thomas replied. "That even after loss and hardship, new beginnings are possible. You taught us that." As the evening wound down and the children went to their rooms, Quinton and Aurora sat together with the book, adding their own entries. They wrote about that first night, about falling in love, about the births of each child, about building a life together in the mountains. Their handwriting intertwined on the pages, just as their lives had intertwined, creating something beautiful and lasting. "I wonder what will happen to this book someday," Aurora mused, "when we are gone and our children have children of their own." "It will be passed down," Quinton said confidently. a record of where they came from, of the love that started their family. Maybe someday, 100 years from now, someone will read these pages and know that we existed, that we loved each other, that we built something that mattered. I hope they know that it started with something simple, a man willing to teach, a woman willing to learn. That is all it took to begin. That and courage. You had tremendous courage, Aurora, to keep trying when you were alone, to trust me when I offered help, to build a life in these mountains. Never forget your own strength. Only because you believed in me first. You saw potential when I could barely see past the next day. You gave me hope, Quinton. That is the greatest gift anyone can give another person. The fire burned low as they wrote, adding their memories and reflections to the pages their children had started. Outside, the mountain night was crisp and clear, stars brilliant in the black sky. An owl called from the forest, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. These sounds had accompanied their entire journey, the constant backdrop to their changing lives. When the book was finally set aside and they climbed into bed, Aurora snuggled close to Quinton with a contented sigh. "Do you think we will have many more years like this?" "I hope so. But even if we do not, we have had more happiness than most people ever find. Whatever comes, we will face it together." "Together," Aurora echoed. "That is the key to everything, is it not? Whatever challenges life brings, having someone to face them with makes all the difference." "You are my partner in everything," Quinton said, kissing her forehead. "My wife, my friend, my fellow adventurer. I could not have asked for a better companion on this journey." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would navigate it as they had navigated everything else. Together, with love and determination, and the bond that had been forged over those early nights of learning by firelight. More years passed, each bringing its own joys and sorrows. Thomas and Elizabeth married and had 2 children of their own, a daughter and a son. Margaret married Samuel and they moved to Denver, where she continued writing while he worked for a major newspaper. They visited often, bringing stories of the wider world to the mountain. James did indeed become a doctor, studying in Denver before returning to open a practice in Lavetta, serving the mountain communities he loved. Quinton and Aurora became grandparents, reveling in the role. They taught their grandchildren the same lessons they had taught their own children, passing down values of education, hard work, and kindness. The family gatherings were boisterous and warm, filling the mountain home with laughter and love. The school in Lavetta continued to thrive, now with 5 teachers and over 60 students. Aurora had stepped back from daily teaching as she aged, but she still visited regularly, reading to the children and telling them stories. She had become something of a legend in the community, the woman who had taught herself to read and then dedicated her life to educating others. Quinton was in his 60s now, his hair white and his face weathered by mountain years. But he was still strong, still capable, though he had passed much of the physical work to his sons and grandsons. He spent his time woodworking, creating beautiful pieces that were treasured throughout the region. He had also finally carved that plaque for Aurora's old cabin, mounted on the wall beside the door. It read, "Here, 2 souls found each other through the simple gift of learning. Here, love began with patience and grew through dedication. Here, a family was born." 1876. Aurora was in her late 50s, still beautiful with silver-streaked auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. She had published a book of her own, a memoir about learning to read as an adult and the transformative power of education. It had been well received, inspiring others who felt too old or too limited to pursue learning. On a summer evening in 1905, the entire family gathered at the mountain home for a celebration. It was Quinton and Aurora's 29th wedding anniversary, and their children had organized a party that included not just family but friends from La Veta and the surrounding areas. "Mama, Papa, we have something to tell you," Thomas announced during dinner. "Elizabeth and I are expecting again. You will have another grandchild by winter." Joy erupted around the table. This would be their 6th grandchild, and each one was precious. "That is wonderful news," Aurora exclaimed, reaching across to squeeze Elizabeth's hand. "What a blessing!" "We have news too," Margaret added. "Samuel's newspaper is promoting him to editor, and they want me to start writing a regular column about life in the mountains. We will be able to visit more often." "And I have news as well," James said, grinning at his parents. "I have met someone. Her name is Catherine, and she is the new schoolteacher in La Veta. I think you will both love her." "Of course we will," Quinton said warmly. "If she has captured your heart, James, she must be special." The evening continued with food and laughter and stories. As the sun set and the sky turned to flame, someone suggested dancing. A fiddle appeared, and soon music filled the mountain air. Quinton, despite his age, swept Aurora into his arms for a waltz under the stars. "We have done well, have we not?" he murmured as they danced. "Better than well. We have created something beautiful. Look at them, Quinton. Our children and their families, all happy and healthy and good. We did that. You did that. You brought love and learning into their lives. I just provided the location. No, we did it together. Everything we have built, we built as partners. That is what I am most proud of, not the school or my book or any individual achievement. I am proud of us, of what we created together." He pulled her closer, their steps perfectly synchronized after decades of moving through life together. "I love you, Aurora Irving. I have loved you since that first night when I saw you refusing to give up, fighting to understand those letters. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known. And you are the kindest. You saw someone struggling and chose compassion over indifference. That choice rippled outward, changing not just my life but the lives of our children and now their children. Never underestimate the power of one act of kindness, Quinton. You proved that night that teaching someone to read could change the world, one person at a time." They danced until the music stopped, and their family gathered around them. 3 generations united by love and the values Quinton and Aurora had instilled. As the evening ended and people began the journey back to town or to their own homes, Aurora stood on the porch with Quinton, watching the stars emerge. "I have been thinking," she said quietly. "We should write down more of our memories, add to that book the children made. I want every detail preserved, every lesson we learned, every moment of joy, so that long after we are gone, our family will know exactly what we felt and believed." "Let us start tonight," Quinton suggested, "while all these feelings are fresh." They went inside and pulled out the leather-bound book, now quite full of entries from over the years. But there were still blank pages, waiting for more stories. They wrote together, taking turns, their handwriting familiar and comfortable on the page. Aurora wrote about the celebration that evening, about the joy of seeing their family grown and thriving. She wrote about what it meant to be a grandmother, to see the values she and Quinton had worked so hard to instill being passed on to another generation. She wrote about love that had lasted nearly 3 decades, grown deeper and richer with each passing year. Quinton wrote about pride in his children, about the satisfaction of seeing them succeed not through luck, but through hard work and dedication. He wrote about Aurora, about how her determination had inspired him to be better, to reach beyond mere survival toward true living. He wrote about gratitude for every day they had been given together, every challenge overcome, every moment of joy shared. When they finished writing, Aurora set the book aside carefully. This will be our legacy, not just this book, but the life we have built. The children we raised, the students we taught, the community we helped build. That is what will last. And the love, Quinton added. That will last too, passed down through generations. Our grandchildren will teach their children about love and dedication and the power of education, and those children will teach theirs. We will live on through what we have given them. It all started with you sitting beside me by firelight, Aurora mused. One simple act of kindness that changed everything. It started with your courage to keep trying even when you were alone. That is what drew me to you, that fierce determination. The teaching was easy. You did all the hard work. We both did the hard work. Building a life together is not easy, even when you love each other. There were challenges, difficult times, but we faced them together and came through stronger. Quinton nodded, remembering harsh winters and sick children, lean years when game was scarce and money scarcer. But also remembering how they had supported each other through everything, never letting hardship drive them apart. If anything, difficulties had forged their bond stronger. I would do it all again, he said firmly. Every struggle, every challenge, because it led to this, to you, to our family. I would not change a single moment, neither would I. Even the painful parts were necessary. They taught us, shaped us, made us who we are. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who had learned long ago that silence between them was never empty. It was full of shared history, of comfortable companionship, of love so deep it needed no words. Finally, Aurora yawned and stretched. We should sleep. Tomorrow Thomas wants your help with that new barn he is building, and I promised Catherine I would meet her for tea. Life continues, even for old people like us. Speak for yourself. I am not old, just well-seasoned, Quinton joked, making Aurora laugh. Very well, my well-seasoned husband. Come to bed, and let us rest these well-seasoned bones. They prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, comfortable in their routines and in each other's presence. In bed, Aurora curled against Quinton's side as she had for nearly 3 decades, her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. Quinton. Yes, love, thank you for finding me. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for this life. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being my home. They drifted to sleep peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their love had created something lasting and beautiful. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, cradling the small cabin where 2 lives had intertwined so many years ago, where love had been born from patience and learning, where a family's story had begun. As autumn arrived again, painting the mountains in gold and crimson, the family gathered once more. James was getting married to Catherine in a ceremony at the church in La Veta. The whole town turned out, testament to the respect and affection the Irving family had earned over the years. Aurora and Quinton sat in the front pew, watching their youngest son pledge his life to the woman he loved. Aurora squeezed Quinton's hand, remembering their own wedding in this same church so many years ago. They had been young then, their future uncertain but hopeful. Now they were older, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. After the ceremony, there was a celebration in the town square. Music and dancing, food and laughter, joy spilling out into the perfect autumn day. Aurora found herself surrounded by her former students, now grown with children of their own, all wanting to thank her for what she had taught them. "You changed my life, Mrs. Irving," said a young man named Peter. "I never would have made anything of myself if you had not taught me to read. Now I own my own business, and I am teaching my children that education matters." "That is all I ever wanted," Aurora told him. "To give others the opportunities I was denied as a young person." "You did the real work, Peter. You took the knowledge and built something with it." Similar conversations happened throughout the day. Aurora was touched by how many lives she had influenced, how far the ripples of that first night's learning had spread. She looked for Quinton and found him surrounded by his own admirers, men he had taught woodworking and hunting, young fathers seeking advice, friends he had made over decades in these mountains. Their eyes met across the crowded square, and they smiled at each other. No words were needed. They both understood what this moment represented, the culmination of everything they had built together. As the celebration wound down and evening approached, the family returned to the mountain home together. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt wonderfully crowded with children and grandchildren. Thomas and Elizabeth's kids ran around with Margaret's, and now James and Catherine joined the family circle. "Tell us the story, Grandma," one of the grandchildren pleaded. "Tell us about how you and Grandpa met." Aurora looked at Quinton, who nodded encouragingly. How many times had they told this story? Hundreds, surely, but it never got old, never lost its power. "It was a cold October evening," she began, and the room fell silent except for the crackling fire. "I was alone in a small cabin, trying to teach myself to read by firelight. I had lost my family to cholera and had nowhere to go, nobody to help me. But I had found an old Bible, and I was determined to understand it." She told the story as she always did, with Quinton adding details and the grandchildren listening with rapt attention. When she reached the part where Quinton first offered to teach her, the youngest grandchild, a girl of 5 named Rose, spoke up. "Grandpa is a hero," Rose declared. "He saved Grandma." "Actually," Quinton said, picking up Rose and settling her on his knee, "Grandma saved me too. We saved each other. That is what people who love each other do. They help each other become better, stronger, happier." "Like Mama and Papa," Rose said, pointing to her parents. "Exactly like that. Your parents learned from us, and someday you will take what you have learned and find someone to share your life with. And the story will continue, generation after generation, all because your grandmother refused to give up on learning to read." The evening continued with more stories, more laughter. As the children were put to bed and the adults lingered over coffee, conversation turned to the future. "We should write all this down," Margaret suggested. "Not just your story, Mama and Papa, but all of our stories. How we grew up, what you taught us, what values we want to pass on, a complete family history." "Your mother and I have been doing that," Quinton said, pulling out the leather-bound book. "But there is always room for more perspectives. Each of you should add your own memories and reflections." The book was passed around, each child reading entries and adding their own. It became a precious artifact, a tangible record of love and legacy. Later, when the house was finally quiet and everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Aurora and Quinton stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. The mountains rose around them, dark giants protecting the valley. "This has been a perfect day," Aurora said, leaning against Quinton's solid warmth. "One of many we have shared," he agreed. "I hope we have many more. Whatever time we have left, I want to spend it just like this. Surrounded by family, doing work that matters, loving you. That sounds perfect to me." They stood together in the mountain darkness, two people who had found each other in loneliness and built something extraordinary. Their love had started with simple acts of kindness and patience, grown through dedication and shared purpose, and now encompassed children and grandchildren, friends and community. It was a love that had changed not just 2 lives but countless others, rippling outward in ways they could never fully measure. "I wish I could go back and tell my younger self not to be afraid," Aurora said quietly. To tell her that sitting in that cabin alone, struggling with those letters, she had no idea how good life was about to become. But the struggle was necessary, Quinton replied. If you had not been willing to fight for your education, I might have walked past that night. Your determination is what caught my attention, what made me stop and want to help. Every part of our story was necessary. You are right. I would not change anything, even the painful parts. They led me to you, to this life, to this moment, and that is worth everything. They returned inside where warmth and comfort waited. Their home, built with their own hands and filled with love, embraced them. In bed they held each other close, grateful for another day together, another evening of family and joy, another night in the life they had built. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and Aurora and Quinton moved with them, aging gracefully into their 70s. They remained active, still involved in the school and community, still teaching their grandchildren, still learning new things themselves. Aurora took up painting in her late 60s, discovering a new way to express the beauty she saw in the mountains. Quinton continued his woodworking, his pieces becoming treasured heirlooms. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916 with a massive gathering that drew people from throughout the region. The schoolhouse in La Veta was renamed the Irving Learning Center in their honor. Both of them protested the recognition, insisting they had only done what anyone should do, but the community insisted they deserved the acknowledgement. You two gave this town its future, Reverend Carlyle's successor declared at the ceremony. Through education and example, through kindness and dedication, you showed us what was possible. This school stands as a testament to your vision and hard work. Aurora was in tears as she cut the ribbon, Quinton's arm steady around her shoulders. Looking at the school, seeing the children who would learn there, knowing that her story had helped make this possible, was almost overwhelming. We did good work, Quinton whispered to her. The best work. We changed lives, Quinton. We actually changed lives. That night, back in their mountain home with just each other for company, they sat by the fire as they had so many thousands of nights before. Aurora picked up a book, one of the new novels that Margaret had sent from Denver, and began to read aloud. Her voice was still strong, still clear, the voice of someone who had claimed education as her right, and used it to transform not just herself but everyone around her. Quinton listened with his eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his weathered face. He had heard Aurora read countless books over the years, but it never got old. Every time she read, he remembered that first night, seeing her struggle and determination, making the choice to help, the best choice of his life. When Aurora finished the chapter and set the book aside, she turned to Quinton. "Are you asleep?" "No, just listening, thinking about how lucky we have been, lucky and blessed. We found each other at exactly the right time, built something beautiful together and lived long enough to see it flourish. Not everyone gets that. No, they do not. We are among the fortunate few." Aurora moved to sit beside Quinton on the couch, tucking herself against his side in the familiar way. "I hope when I die, it is after you," she said quietly. "I do not want to face even one day without you. Aurora, do not talk about dying. We have years yet. Maybe. But I want you to know that every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the times we struggled or fought or faced difficulties. All of it was worth it because we faced it together. I feel the same way. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Aurora. You took a broken, angry man and helped him heal. You gave me purpose and love and family. I could never repay that. You already have. Every day you chose to stay with me to build this life, to love our children and teach our grandchildren. That has been repayment enough." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and close, two souls so intertwined that separation seemed impossible. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, a sound that had accompanied their entire journey together. "Read me one more chapter," Quinton requested. "Of course." Aurora picked up the book again, finding her place, and began to read. Her voice filled the cabin, speaking of adventures and emotions, of characters facing their own challenges and finding their own happy endings. But the real story was not in the book. It was in the two people sitting together by firelight, aged now but still deeply in love, still partners in everything. It was in the life they had built, the family they had raised, the community they had served. It was in every word Aurora read, every skill she had mastered from that first determined struggle with a Bible by firelight so many years ago. The fire burned down to embers as Aurora read, casting dancing shadows on the walls of their home. And as she read, Quinton held her close, grateful for this moment, this life, this love that had sustained them through decades. Whatever the future held, however many days or years remained, they would face it as they had faced everything. Together, with love and determination and the bond forged on that long-ago October night when a mountain man found a woman teaching herself to read and chose to sit beside her and learn together. Their story would continue through their children and grandchildren, passed down through generations as an example of what love could accomplish, how dedication and patience could transform lives. It was a story worth telling, worth preserving, worth living. And as Aurora's voice carried through the quiet cabin, reading words another author had written but giving them her own music, her own meaning, it was clear that their story was far from over. It would continue as long as there were people who believed in love, in learning, in the power of two souls joining together to create something greater than either could have built alone. The end came peacefully for both of them, years later, in their mid-80s. Quinton passed first in his sleep, with Aurora beside him. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, tears streaming down her face but also a smile, knowing he had lived a full life and died peacefully at home. She had 3 more years without him, years she spent finishing their story, writing down every memory, every lesson, every moment of joy. When her own time came, surrounded by children and grandchildren, she was ready. Her last words were about Quinton, about love, about the importance of never giving up on learning and growing. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery near La Veta, overlooking the mountains they had loved. Their grave marker bore a simple inscription: Quinton and Aurora Irving. Together they learned, together they loved, together they built a legacy of education and devotion. 1827–1918 and 1838–1921. But their real memorial was not in stone. It was in the school that still bore their name, still teaching children the value of education. It was in their descendants, spreading throughout Colorado and beyond, carrying forward the values of kindness, determination, and love. It was in the leather-bound book that became a family treasure, passed from generation to generation, each adding their own stories, but always returning to that first entry about a mountain man and a woman learning together by firelight. A century after that first October evening, their great-great-grandchildren gathered at the original cabin, now carefully preserved as a historic site. They read from the family book, sharing the story with their own children, making sure the legacy continued. One young girl, holding her own primer, traced the letters on the first page and asked her mother, "Is it true? Did great-great-great-grandma really teach herself to read?" "It is true," her mother confirmed. And when great-great-great-grandpa found her trying so hard, he sat down beside her and helped. That is how our family began, with kindness and patience and 2 people who refused to give up on learning. That is a good story, the girl decided. The best story. And it is our story, which makes it even more special. Remember it always, sweetheart. Remember that education is precious, that love requires dedication, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is sit beside someone and learn together. The girl nodded solemnly, understanding in the way children sometimes do that she had been told something important, something that would shape her own life in ways she could not yet imagine. And so the story continued, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love and learning, to two people who found each other in the wilderness and built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. The story of Quinton and Aurora Irving, mountain man and determined student, teacher and wife, partners in all things, whose love began with letters by firelight and grew into a legacy that would never be forgotten.